What would you do if your newborn baby looked nothing like you or your spouse? This is the incredible true story that happened to Marcus and Diana Johnson in Atlanta, Georgia, and it will change everything you think you know about genetics and miracles. Marcus Johnson paced back and forth in the hospital waiting room, his hands shaking as he checked his phone for the 100th time. His wife Diana had been in labor for 12 hours, and the doctors said the baby would arrive any moment. At 28 years old, Marcus worked as a mechanic at a local garage, and Diana, 26, was a kindergarten teacher. They had been married for 3 years and had dreamed of this moment since their wedding day. The couple had painted the nursery yellow because they wanted to be surprised by the gender, and Marcus had already bought a tiny baseball glove, hoping for a boy he could teach to play catch. When the nurse finally called his name, Marcus's heart nearly burst with excitement. He rushed down the hallway, his work boots echoing against the polished floor. Diana had given birth to a healthy baby boy, weighing 7 pounds and 2 ounces. Marcus pushed open the door to Diana's room, expecting to see his beautiful wife holding their perfect baby. What he saw instead made his blood run cold and his world turn upside down. Diana was crying, not tears of joy, but tears of confusion and fear. In her arms was a baby with pale white skin, bright blue eyes, and wispy blonde hair. Marcus froze in the doorway, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. This couldn't be his child. Both he and Diana were African American, with dark skin, brown eyes, and black hair. Their families had been in America for generations, and there was no history of mixed-race relationships that they knew of. The baby looked like he belonged to a completely different family, maybe a Swedish or Irish couple down the hall. Marcus felt a crushing weight in his chest, as the only explanation his mind could accept began to take shape. His wife, the woman he loved and trusted more than anyone in the world, must have betrayed him. Diana looked up at Marcus with desperate eyes, immediately recognizing the expression on his face. She had known this moment would come as soon as she saw their son for the first time. The nurse had been just as shocked, double-checking the hospital bans to make sure there hadn't been a mix-up. But there was no mistake. This was definitely their baby, born from Diana's body just minutes ago. She tried to speak, to explain something she couldn't even understand herself, but the words wouldn't come. The silence between them stretched like a chasm, filled with unspoken accusations and broken trust. Marcus stepped back from the bed, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. He couldn't bring himself to look at the baby again. The image of that pale little face had already burned itself into his memory, a constant reminder of what he believed was his wife's infidelity. Diana had always been beautiful, kind, and loving. She volunteered at their church, helped elderly neighbors with their groceries, and had never given him any reason to doubt her faithfulness. How else could he explain what he was seeing? The evidence was right there in her arms, impossible to deny or rationalize away. The nurse returned to check on Diana and the baby, immediately sensing the tension in the room. She had delivered hundreds of babies over her 20-year career, but she had never seen anything quite like this. The medical staff had already begun whispering in the hallways, and she knew this case would be talked about for years to come. She tried to maintain her professional composure as she checked the baby's vital signs, but even she couldn't help stealing glances at the unusual combination of features. The baby was perfectly healthy and beautiful, but he looked like he had been born to the wrong parents. Diana finally found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. She begged Marcus to come closer, to hold their son, to at least look at him properly. She swore on her mother's grave that she had never been unfaithful, that she had never even looked at another man since the day they met. Her voice grew stronger as she spoke, filled with the conviction of someone telling the absolute truth. She reminded Marcus of their courtship, how they had been inseparable since their first date, how he had been her first and only love. She had never spent a night away from home without him, never had the opportunity or desire to cheat. Marcus wanted to believe her, but the evidence seemed overwhelming. He had learned in school that genetics was simple. 2 brown-eyed parents couldn't have a blue-eyed child, and 2 dark-skinned parents couldn't have a white child. At least that's what he thought he knew. The baby's features were so dramatically different from both parents that it seemed impossible for him to be their biological child. Marcus felt like he was living in a nightmare, watching his perfect life crumble around him. He had worked double shifts for months to save money for the baby's arrival, had read parenting books, and had even started talking to Diana's belly every night. The doctor entered the room, sensing immediately that something was very wrong. Dr. Patricia Williams had been practicing obstetrics for 15 years, and had delivered both Marcus and Diana when they were born at the same hospital. She was a family friend who had known them since they were children, which made this situation even more delicate. She examined the baby carefully, noting his perfect health and development. Everything about him was normal except for his appearance, which defied everything she thought she knew about genetics. She suggested that the family might want to consider genetic testing to understand what had happened. Diana pleaded with Marcus to stay, to work through this together as a family. She held the baby up toward him, pointing out tiny features that resembled both of them. The baby had Marcus's nose and Diana's lips, she insisted. His hands were shaped like Marcus's, and he had the same calic that Diana had as a child. But Marcus couldn't see past the obvious differences. The baby's skin was so pale it was almost translucent. His eyes were the brightest blue Marcus had ever seen, and his hair was so blonde it looked almost white under the hospital lights. These features seemed to overshadow any subtle similarities Diana claimed to see. As word spread through the hospital, nurses and doctors found excuses to walk past their room. Some tried to be discreet, but others stared openly at the unusual family. The attention made Marcus feel even more humiliated and angry. He imagined that everyone was thinking the same thing he was, that his wife had cheated on him, and was now trying to pass off another man's child as his own. The shame burned in his chest like acid, and he couldn't bear to stay in the room any longer. He told Diana he needed air and walked out, leaving her alone with the baby and her tears. Diana spent the next hour holding her son close to her chest, whispering apologies and promises to him. She named him Michael, after Marcus's father, hoping that this gesture might help bridge the gap between father and son. Michael slept peacefully in her arms, unaware of the chaos his arrival had caused. Diana studied every inch of his tiny face, trying to understand how this beautiful miracle had happened. She had carried him for 9 months, felt every kick and movement, and knew without a doubt that he was hers and Marcus's child. But she also understood why Marcus was struggling to accept the truth. When Marcus returned to the room 3 hours later, his eyes were red and swollen from crying. He had called his brother James, who worked as a security guard at the hospital, and asked him to come for support. James took one look at baby Michael and had the same shocked reaction as everyone else. But unlike Marcus, James was more curious than angry. He suggested they get a DNA test immediately to settle the question once and for all. If Diana was telling the truth, the test would prove it. If she wasn't, they would know that too. Either way, they needed facts instead of assumptions and accusations. The idea of a DNA test gave both Marcus and Diana hope, though for different reasons. Marcus was certain it would prove that he wasn't the father, which would at least give him clarity about his next steps. Diana knew it would prove her innocence and hopefully save her marriage. They agreed to have the test done immediately, even though it would take several days to get the results. Those would be the longest days of their lives, filled with tension, doubt, and sleepless nights. Marcus moved into the guest bedroom, unable to share a bed with Diana, while doubts consumed his thoughts. The baby spent his first week of life in an atmosphere of uncertainty and conflict. Diana cared for him alone while Marcus went to work and tried to pretend everything was normal.
No.
But nothing was normal.
No.
His coworkers had heard about the situation and offered their opinions, most of them assuming that Diana had been unfaithful. Some suggested that Marcus should leave her immediately and file for divorce. Others advised him to wait for the DNA results before making any major decisions. The constant speculation and advice from others only made Marcus more confused and angry. Diana, meanwhile, was experiencing the loneliness of new motherhood multiplied by the isolation of being accused of infidelity. Her mother came to stay and help with the baby, but even she seemed uncertain about the situation. Diana's friends from church visited, but their conversations felt awkward and strained. Everyone was thinking the same thing, even if they were too polite to say it out loud. How could 2 black parents have a white baby unless someone had been unfaithful? The scientific explanation seemed impossible, so the obvious conclusion was infidelity. Baby Michael continued to thrive despite the tension around him. He ate well, slept peacefully, and seemed to be developing normally in every way. But his appearance became even more striking as the days passed. His blue eyes grew brighter, his blonde hair became more pronounced, and his skin remained porcelain white. He looked like a perfect, healthy baby who happened to belong to a different ethnic group than his parents. The contrast was so dramatic that strangers in the grocery store would stare openly, trying to figure out the family dynamics. On the 5th day after Michael's birth, Dr. Williams called with the DNA results. Marcus and Diana sat in her office, holding hands for the first time since the delivery. Both of them were terrified of what they might hear, though for opposite reasons. Diana squeezed Marcus's hand tightly, praying that the results would vindicate her and restore their family. Marcus sat rigidly in his chair, bracing himself for confirmation of his worst fears. The seconds felt like hours as Dr. Williams opened the envelope containing their future. Dr. Williams smiled as she read the results, immediately putting Diana's fears to rest. The DNA test showed with 99.9% certainty that Marcus was indeed the father of baby Michael. There was no doubt, no room for error, and no possibility of infidelity. Michael was genetically their child, carrying DNA from both parents, despite his dramatically different appearance. Diana burst into tears of relief while Marcus sat in stunned silence, trying to process this impossible information. If the baby was definitely his, then how could he look so completely different from both parents? The revelation that Michael was indeed their biological child created a new mystery that was even more puzzling than the original question. Dr. Williams explained that she had never seen anything like this case in her entire career. She had consulted with geneticists and other specialists, and they were all equally baffled by Michael's appearance. The combination of features he displayed should have been genetically impossible, given his parents' background. Yet the DNA evidence was undeniable, and medical science would have to find an explanation for this extraordinary case. Marcus finally held his son for the first time, 8 days after his birth. The moment was both beautiful and strange, as he looked down at this tiny person who was undeniably his child, but looked nothing like him. Michael opened his bright blue eyes and seemed to focus on his father's face, creating an instant connection despite the unusual circumstances. Marcus felt a flood of love and protection wash over him, followed immediately by guilt for doubting Diana and rejecting his son. He apologized to both of them through his tears, promising to be the father and husband they deserved. Dr. Williams referred the family to Dr. Robert Chen, a genetic specialist at Emory University, who had agreed to study Michael's case. Dr. Chen had heard about the unusual birth and was fascinated by the scientific implications. He explained that while Michael's appearance seemed impossible, there were several rare genetic phenomena that could potentially explain what had happened. The most likely explanation involved dormant genes from distant ancestors that had somehow been activated or expressed in unexpected ways. Dr. Chen conducted extensive genetic testing on all 3 family members, mapping their DNA in unprecedented detail. What he discovered was remarkable and would change the way scientists understood genetic inheritance. Both Marcus and Diana carried recessive genes for light skin, blue eyes, and blonde hair, inherited from European ancestors many generations back. These genes had been dormant in their families for so long that no one even remembered having white ancestors. But in Michael's case, the perfect combination of recessive genes had aligned to create his unique appearance. The explanation fascinated Dr. Chen, who compared it to winning the genetic lottery with odds of millions to 1. Michael had inherited the exact combination of recessive traits needed to appear Caucasian. Despite having 2 African-American parents, it was similar to how 2 brown-eyed parents could occasionally have a blue-eyed child, but much more complex and rare. The case would be written up in medical journals and studied by geneticists around the world. Michael wasn't just their miracle baby. It was a scientific miracle that expanded understanding of human genetics. Marcus and Diana were amazed to learn about their hidden ancestry and the incredible genetic journey that had created their son. They discovered that Marcus's great-great-grandmother had been half Irish, and Diana's family tree included a Scottish ancestor from the 1800s. These European genes had been passed down through generations, hidden behind dominant African genes, waiting for the perfect moment to resurface. Michael was living proof that human genetics was far more complex and surprising than anyone had imagined. The news of their genetic discovery spread throughout their community, transforming Michael from a source of shame and suspicion into a celebrated miracle. Their church held a special service to thank God for this amazing blessing, and their story was featured in local newspapers and medical publications. People who had whispered and speculated about Diana's faithfulness now marveled at the incredible genetic phenomenon that had created their beautiful baby. Michael became known as the Miracle Baby, a living testament to the mysteries and wonders of human inheritance. As Michael grew, his unique appearance continued to attract attention wherever the family went. But now Marcus and Diana wore their son's differences with pride instead of shame. They understood that he was special in ways that went far beyond his unusual looks. He represented the incredible diversity hidden within every human family tree and the amazing possibilities that existed within genetic inheritance. His birth had tested their marriage and their faith, but it had ultimately made them stronger and more appreciative of the miracles that surrounded them every day. Dr. Chun continued to study Michael's case as he grew, documenting his development and comparing his genetic profile to his parents. Michael's health remained perfect, and his personality began to shine through as a happy, curious child who brought joy to everyone who met him. His story became an inspiration to families dealing with unexpected challenges and a reminder that sometimes the most surprising gifts come in forms we never expected. The baby who had once threatened to destroy a marriage had instead created a stronger family and contributed to scientific understanding of human genetics. Marcus often reflected on those first terrible days when he had doubted Diana and rejected his son. The shame of his initial reaction motivated him to become an even better husband and father. Determined to make up for the pain he had caused, he learned that love and trust were more important than appearances, and that miracles could happen in the most unexpected ways. Michael's birth had taught him that sometimes the things that seem impossible are simply waiting for science to catch up and provide explanations for life's most amazing mysteries.